Hello, I'm Wyzant Math Tutor Joseph Burke, and I'm here to answer the question for you, what is the best method for factoring a quadratic? And the answer is, while there's no best method for factoring a quadratic, because it's somewhat situational and subjective, a very popular method is called the slide and divide method, which is a great method when you've got a three-term quadratic with a leading coefficient that is not 1, because what it does is it converts it into a quadratic that does have a coefficient of 1, which is much easier to factor, and allows you to convert those factors into the factors of your quadratic. You'll see what I mean. So the first thing we need to do is provide you with a quadratic. And the quadratic I've given you, 6x squared minus 27x plus 27, I chose because these have three terms. The leading term is not 1, and it has a greatest common factor between all three terms. The greatest common factor is 3, and the first important step is always, when you're factoring out quadratics, is to factor out the greatest common factor. So we're going to factor out 3. So first step, factor out the greatest common factor. We factor out the 3. Then the next step is going to be to slide the leading term out of the quadratic that's left after we factor out the greatest common factor, which in this case is the 2. And so first step of the slide and divide method is to slide. What are we sliding? We're sliding the leading coefficient 2 over to the constant. And that's going to give us an 18. So the next step of the slide and divide method you might think is divide, but there's something that comes first. We're going to factor this quadratic. Now, the factors of this quadratic are not the same as the quadratic we wanted to factor, but we can use them. So I'm going to assume you know how to factor a quadratic with a leading coefficient of 1. And if you do, this is what you're going to get. X squared minus 9x plus 18 is x minus 3 times x minus 6. Convince yourself it's so, and if you're not sure how, then I'll build you another video. Just ask me the question. Okay, so the next step of the slide and divide method, of course, is divide. What are we dividing? We're going to divide the constants, in this case, minus 3 and minus 6. What are we dividing by? We're going to divide by our leading coefficient, 2. So we go ahead and we divide, and what we get when we divide each of them by 2 is x minus 3 over 2 and x minus 6 over 2. The next step is we have to simplify. So you might notice that sometimes, like with 3 over 2, you can't simplify, and that's okay. Just leave it how it is. If you can simplify it, it might simplify to a simpler fraction, or it might even become an integer. In this case, 6 over 2 simplifies just to 3. So when we simplify, we get x minus 3 over 2, x minus 3, and we're not quite done yet. The last step is to slide back. What are we going to slide back? We're going to slide back our denominator. So while the 6 over 2 becomes 3, that has no denominator, we can leave x minus 3 how it is. On our first binomial factor, you'll notice that we've got a 2 in the denominator. We're going to slide that over. And when we do, this is what we get. Now, this is basically our polynomial right here. And so you shouldn't forget that we originally factored out a 3. And so our final answer is going to be 3 times 2x minus 3 times x minus 3. That is the slide and divide method in which we make sure that we factor out the greatest common factor. We slide over we're going to then slide over our leading coefficient, multiplying it by the constant. We're going to factor. We're going to divide by the leading coefficient again. Then we're going to slide back any denominators and plug back in to get our answer. Slide and divide method. Thank you very much.